fourth quarter. Back and forth it went. Kings trailed by as much as 6 midway through the fourth, got all the way back, had their chances, but they fall by 2. We're going to talk more about it right now with our Sactown Sports Kings insider, one of our insiders, and that is Brenden Nunes joining me, Jason Ross, along with Carmichael Dave. Good morning, Brenden.
Morning. How's it going, fellas?
It's going. We've been a little bummed about the outcome of last night. I think it was a game that was winnable. I don't know that they should have won. That's kind of what Dave and I were talking about. But there were things inside there that both Dave and I kind of had a mini list here of reasons why it didn't go the Kings' way. Tell us maybe your biggest factor, Brenden, on why the Kings are 0-1.
Yeah, I would say that end of the third quarter is really what stood out to me. That's kind of what I ended up going back and watching again last night after the post game, and what everybody was really focused on. You know, they had an okay, about narrow margin lead going into halftime, about a 4-point lead, and eventually stretched that out to a 12-point advantage. But Minnesota ends the third quarter on an 11-0 run. The Kings don't score over the final, I believe it's 3:08 of that quarter. And that's really where Minnesota kind of came back alive. So that stretch specifically stands out to me. I'll say Minnesota shooting 21 more threes definitely stands out as well. And Julius Randle, a guy that's a 33% career three-point shooter, going 5 of 6 from 3 doesn't really help your odds either.
No, and look, it's easy to say, hey, why didn't they score? And I know that's not what you're saying, but let's remember Minnesota's defense is fantastic. That being said, you know, that it's times like that, Brenden, that when we signed DeMar DeRozan, I was thinking, okay, you know, Harrison Barnes was like a very diet version of DeMar in the sense that when the team would get out of sorts, when they'd have scoring droughts, you know, Harrison would usually drive to the basket, draw a foul, and just at least get points on the board. This is the part where I wanted DeRozan to be a factor more, and you just can't have there's going to be runs. There's going to be ebbs and flows. Of course, it's the NBA. That's going to happen. But this is something that happened last year. This is something that happened last night. And they're going to have a long, long season if they can't figure that out.
Yeah, I'd say overall, I think your initial point is kind of where I'm at, that Minnesota is a really good defense. And I don't think that the Karl Anthony Towns, Julius Randle swap really changes much of that. There's a little bit of a difference of, you know, they're not going to put Cat on their big and let Rudy Gobert be able to kind of free roam in almost a safety role where he's really able to mess up the game in that way. But they were the best defense in the league last year. That's where they made their money, and offensively is where their struggles should be. It was just, like I mentioned, I mean, Randall kind of had a big game that really kept them in there. A couple of mistakes from the Kings in the third quarter allowed them to not put that one away. But I think the shot profile stands out to me. They only took 29 threes. I think the marker is probably closer to a 35 mark that they're aiming for this year. Last year it was about 40, but obviously DeMar DeRozan being a mid-range specialist and just, I mean, as efficient as he is at that shot, you're going to live with taking a few more of those. But I think for the most part, you take your percentages against what was the best defense in the league last year, and you still see them. I think they're just as talented in that aspect this year.
Yeah, Brenden, that's what I was talking about with Dave. It's like it's the fine line of finding the strengths of DeMar DeRozan, like you said, the mid-range, getting to the foul line. That's a weapon. I mean, that's something the Kings didn't have before, but also still hitting the strengths of everyone else with their three-point ability, spreading the floor, getting the offense in a rhythm. And that's the only thing I felt about DeMar last night. I thought he was good. I thought there was a couple times, though, that it didn't look like the Kings offense that we're used to, and maybe we'll get used to this, but a few more ISOs, a few more dribbles. Even on a night where he was good, I felt like they didn't get the best of everyone, and I think that's the next task for Mike Brown and DeMar and the offense to figure out how they can get all the best pieces of everybody.
Yeah, and I think it's the natural developmental sort of curve. You know, it's game one of the regular season we're still talking about here. I think preseason works is a little bit of an adjustment period, but you're not going to go all out when you're a little bit later into your career like DeRozan. I don't think like Fox has the same motivation in preseason, for example. So, yeah, I mean, I think that you're really just kind of ironing out the kinks. There is going to be a difference. 29 threes is that they only shot less than 30 exactly at that same 29 mark once all of last season. They did it 6 times in the year prior, and those are the only times since Mike Brown has taken over as head coach. So, yeah, I think stylistically there are just going to be some differences, specifically when it comes to that shot profile with when you add a guy like DeMar DeRozan. But I think for the most part, that stabilizing presence that HB had sometimes, that DeMar kind of provided that. He got to the line 14 times, which I don't know about you guys, but I had a realization yesterday about, I know that he gets to the line, obviously, but I don't think I really pieced together that meant, oh, we're going to be watching some long basketball games. Mm-hmm. There was a couple coaches' challenges in there as well that kind of prolonged some of the action. But for the most part, I thought that he fit in fairly well for what is his first game. 7 of 18 from the field. I think you take that, mention him getting to the free throw line. Yeah, it's just that shot profile that I think is going to be in a little bit of an adjustment, and maintaining that offensive flow in the half court, I think is where they hope DeRozan can make a big impact, and saw it a little bit last night, but that's going to be a continual process.
1 assist, as we talked to Brenden Nunes, our Sactown Sports Kings insider. 1 assist for Domantas Sabonis. We were just going over his low for the year last year was 2 against the Knicks. 15 points in 37 minutes for De'Aaron Fox. Those are both way, way, way below their season averages from last year. Is that the DeMar DeRozan effect? Is that to you just first game of the year? Is that something to keep an eye on?
I got to watch back that game a little bit today as well to get a slightly better feel for the specifics of it. But I would say that it's a combination of both of what you mentioned, along with Minnesota playing they're allowed to play a unique defense because they have Rudy Gobert as that back line. Really, all of their perimeter guys are doing that. They're guarding the perimeter and really funneling you towards Gobert. So I think that makes it a little bit difficult it makes you lean more towards pick and rolls rather than dribble handoffs when it comes to sort of how you're running a 2-man game with Sabonis. And I think that combined with your scoring a lot in transition, Minnesota had 17 turnovers that Sacramento forced, and they scored 22 points off of it. A lot of points in the paint that we saw for the Kings as well. 40 of their points came from right there, which both of those not the most prone to Domas assists. So I would say that, a little bit of a learning curve for sure, but for the most part, I actually think it's Minnesota's defense and the way that their perimeter defenders aren't able to really just emphasize denying the 3-point line and beyond, since they have that back line of Rudy.
Brenden, the Kings played 10 guys, and I think that's what we thought they would do. About that 10, maybe McLaughlin was kind of the mystery man. Would he get in? He did not. But just on minutes, heavy minutes for Keegan and DeRozan and several starters. What did you think of the kind of the rotation and the minute distribution?
Mike Brown said a couple times, he repeated it last night, he said it at the couple practices in a row leading up to it, that this is one of the worst feels he's had for a team coming into training camp. And every time he says it, I'm like, man, I don't know if you should be saying this. But I appreciate the honesty. I think that you're seeing him lean on the guys that what you have out of them. All of the starters outside of Kevin Huerter play at least 35 minutes. Kevin Huerter flirts with 20. You have Malik Monk at 26. And then nobody else has more than 11. Keon at 11. Trey Lyles at 11. Alex Len at almost 6, 5.5 for Doug McDermott. So I think that he is still very much trying to figure out what the 7, even 6 really through 9 to 10 in his rotation may be. I will say, like, when the starting lineup came out yesterday, it stood out to me that Isaac Jones, 2-way player, was technically active and available for that game. Could there have been a situation where if things weren't going well, maybe those 5 minutes that McDermott got could have potentially gone to Isaac Jones? So I think that Mike's been very transparent. Like I said, that this is still a learning process for him, getting a feel for the newer guys on the team, some that are still coming back from injury. Like I thought Trey Lyles looked really rough yesterday when he came in the game, was part of that third quarter stretch for Minnesota. And Minnesota was very, determined to be like, let's get that guy involved in the action. And it went well for them for the most part. So I understand why he only felt comfortable leaning on 6. I would say Keon Ellis is the one that I probably personally wouldn't have minded to see get a little bit more run. But for the most part, it's just a coach still trying to get a feel for what certain guys at the end of his bench that he hasn't gotten a good look at throughout the course of training camp and preseason can really provide and bring to this team. And it might say something about the depth, but I'm kind of holding off a little bit until Mike Brown is able to get a little bit of a better feel before I'm fully thinking that take in.
Last question, and we're almost out of time, Brenden. So let's both be quick here. I just want to go back to your thing on Minnesota's defense, which is well taken. I looked at the 3 games the Kings and Timberwolves played last year, and Domantas Sabonis averaged 7 assists a game. De'Aaron Fox averaged 32 points a game. So in both those cases, obviously larger sample size, those are better. Your implication is that it's Minnesota's defense, not the presence of DeMar DeRozan or much of anything else. So does that lead to their defense perhaps being even better and more switchable without Karl-Anthony Towns? Because that's really the only difference other than DeRozan and for the most part in these 2 starting lineups.
Yeah, I would say a big difference is you're kind of more comfortable putting Rudy on Domas. I think that was kind of the case last year, and then you ended up with Cat chasing around Harrison Barnes. This year it's Julius Randle chasing around Keegan Murray. So I do think there are like game specific instances that led to Domas getting his 1 assist. But I think for the most part, like, yeah, there's, DeMar could have gotten the ball from Domas and just taken 3 dribbles instead of 2. Like I said, I got to go back and kind of watch the specifics of all of those moments, but I would say for the most part, a fairly similar Minnesota defense, and the Kings did approach it a bit of a different way. Really, that shot profile stands out a lot to me. A lot of mid-range looks that, were taken after a few dribbles and not very much ball movement. So definitely still think that, like I said, Minnesota and the way they play defense factored in here, but the Kings could have taken some better shots and moved the ball a bit better within their flow.
All right, that's our Sactown Sports Kings insider. He and Frank, that's Brenden Nunes, doing great work on our site and Twitter, everywhere. You can follow them and find them, all their great work. Brenden, thank you for joining us. We'll keep this going all season long, and we'll talk to you again next week.
Appreciate you guys. It's nice being up around this time, let me tell you.
Is it?
Yeah,
Is it really?
Yeah, it's a whole new world out here.
Wait till about 3 p.m., dude.
Yeah, then it kicks in. Thanks, Brent.
Appreciate it, guys.
All right, that's Brenden Nunes. He'll that wall will hit him. We know that, Dave. All right,
it will.
It will. Break time for us when we come back. More into this game, a little more a locker room reaction, more from Dave and I on Game 1, the loss.